Korean folklore is a big part of Korean culture. Weird stories, agrarian stories. And the night before I was born, before my mother went into labor, she had a dream. And she had this dream that she received a bean. And this bean that she was gifted grew into this ginormous bean. And this ginormous bean grew so big that all the people in the village would come around to admire this bean and to look up to this bean. And my mother said to me, "You are that bean." I was 4, so I didn't really know what to take from that. But she would repeat the story to me my entire life, over and over. Don't forget, you are the bean. So I was born in Seoul, came to the United States when I was 4. Very much an impoverished immigrant story. We had nothing. I had 3 older sisters. I remember sleeping with my 3 other sisters on a queen-size bed in a 1-bedroom apartment, which meant, you know, when I thought about that later on, where were my parents sleeping? They were probably on the floor in the living room, right? So at that time, the neighborhood that I was living in was almost entirely Black and Latino. And I didn't really think about identity at that point. So in the 4th grade, we move up to the suburbs, and I quickly become the only person of color in my school. Certainly one of the very few Asians. And in those sort of adolescent time periods, as challenging enough as it is, when you're also trying to figure out your identity and where you fit, and I'm a Korean-born citizen, but I really grew up in the States. I grew up watching the Bulls, and at the same time, I think the Asian American experience is very much one which Ronald Takaki calls feeling like you're a stranger in your own backyard. And so I grow up through high school, and I try very, very hard to assimilate, I think, into what is commonly referred to as sort of bro culture. And I come to IU, and I naturally continue that transition, and I'm out rushing a fraternity, and I'm trying so desperately to fit in, and it's actually kind of, it's exhausting, right? Because I kind of tell myself, if I stand really still, no one will tell that I'm Asian. And something just doesn't sit right with me. I'm at an age where I have this opportunity to come to a big university to sort of go down this path of self-identity and a journey towards, I guess, sort of forging your consciousness, I guess. So I go to my first Asian American Association meeting. There's a student organization on campus. I say, "Hi, my name is Joon Park. I'm an Asian American." Everyone says, "Hi, Joon. Welcome." And it begins this journey for me where I begin to study Asian American literature and history. And as I'm flipping through these pages, I see Asians who've been in the United States since 1880. I see Japanese Americans in internment camps. And I begin to become very, very empowered by what I'm reading and what I'm seeing. And the game changer for me is this notion of being a foreigner in your own backyard is this false pretense that I've always had. And understanding that all of these different cultures is part of a truly American narrative just sort of blows my mind. And it kind of liberates me from this framework of thinking about my identity in that way. And so I dedicate pretty much my entire student career to advocating for Asian Americans and the Asian American community. I stay at Indiana Bloomington for the summer in 1996, and I write a proposal to establish the Indiana University Asian Cultural Center. And it was a moonshot. So there was a strategic initiatives grant at the time, which was primarily meant for grants for students, but there was a loophole because they never said students couldn't submit their proposals. So I wrote one, and I spent my entire summer putting that proposal together, and the following year, I start meeting with other student leaders. And these student leaders, including the Black Students Union, the LGBT community, Latinos Unidos, they all have different concerns that we want to start to voice. And we formed something called the Student Coalition. So in 1997, Martin Luther King Day was not an official holiday recognized by Indiana University. So on that day, we decided that we were going to march with demands, and we had this group called the Student Coalition. And it was 1960s nostalgia, civil rights, type of movement. And we all march on the chancellor's office. We were going to chain ourselves to the chancellor's office door and do something very dramatic. And I remember it was my moment to speak to the crowd. And I stepped up to the mic, and I saw all these people. And it occurred to me that maybe this was my moment. I'm the bean now. And I spoke, and we were expecting something really dramatic, and then the late Ken Gross Lewis, the chancellor, actually said, you know what, this all makes sense. All of the demands will be met. So it was a little bit anticlimactic, and I remember walking away thinking, wow, the moonshot worked. So MLK Day is now officially celebrated holiday at IU. We have an IU Asian Culture Center that's been around for 20 years. And the big moment for me afterwards, I remember coming back to my apartment just kind of in this daze, but it soon kind of dawned on me, what happens now? What happens after you're woke? What happens to the bean? Because you leave college and you go on into the real world, and my identity was so tied to being an Asian American student leader. What was I going to do now? Did I peak at 21? Was it all downhill from here? And like most people, I think when they leave the university, they go on and their career sort of becomes their new identity that they begin to form. That's what they focus on. And when I joined the corporate world, one of the things that I sort of strived to accomplish was to end up becoming a C-level executive at a asset management firm. And I worked really hard over 15 years and was able to accomplish that. And I remember sitting in our office, and we had 50 employees, and we built this thing from the ground up. And I thought, well, maybe I'm the bean now, and those are the people. Maybe that's what this was supposed to be. But that didn't really sit really well with me either. So I quit. And our third child is on the way. We have a almost 2-year-old daughter at home. And I remember my daughter coming up to me, and she just comes up right to your sort of knees. And she looks up and she kind of puts her hands up, which is like the sign for I want to be lifted. And at that moment, I think I sort of realized what my parents were trying to communicate to me, and I sort of finally understood what it meant to be the bean. Thank you.